and then I retired from there. I actually thought about this. I'm thankful that I've had the opportunity to come here, because when the topic of ethics and war and peace came up, I thought that was a really interesting topic. And there's a couple categories. There's one category of things I've never really thought of before, and this sort of fell in that area. And then there's other things that I just sort of avoided thinking about, and this also falls in that area. I'm going to start things off. It's a little bit, I'm going to wind up having a little bit of a debate with myself. There's only one of me, but by telling a story of three people. And the first person was a person that grew up very poor, like poor, maybe like you've never seen poor. And growing up in this kind of environment, he had some unique experiences. He used to think in terms of like the Maslow's triangle of need. And he felt that a lot of his life was in the lower levels of it. He was just trying to survive from one job to the next. That's including food and shelter and things like that. So he felt that he spent a lot of time in the lower ones, and he dreamed of some day that he could actually not be in that area, where he could work towards his self-fulfillment. I'm really glad that I put a couple things down here, and I'm glad, because they were on the slides, and I would have never remembered it otherwise. His dream was to go to college, be a first member of his family to go to college, and he wanted to study botany. And he had a fascination with plants. It's sort of funny. But he had and it was called heliotropism, and I've learned that word because of him. And it's where plants have this natural ability for the leaves and the flowers to turn upwards towards the sun. And the sun will come up, and it just sort of goes this way, and it just sort of follows the sun. And he had a real fascination with that. And along with his fascination, he thought, well, things bloom at certain times of the season, and those kinds of things represented some optimism for him. The other thing was his father. I'll tell you a little bit about his relationship with his father. I don't know much about the rest of his family. But his father, has anyone here watched Charles Bronson movies? I know that's back in but Charles Bronson was a guy who played a vigilante type. And it seemed like each of his movies sort of followed the same script. He was just some normal, average, middle-class guy that just was minding his own business, and then the bad guys come along and either hurt or kill his family, and then he's wrong. He's on his own, and then he just snaps. And because I think in the United States at that time, a lot of people were thinking, well, you know, the big wheels turn slowly. Sometimes justice is slow. And then he sort of overcame that by saying, I'm going to take matters into my own hands. He would try to do things the right way, and they would say, well, sir, you have to do paperwork, you have to do... And then finally he's just like, you know what, I'm just going to take care of this myself. And as you're watching the parts of the movie, you're like, hooray for him. A lot of people, especially in the 70s, 80s, that they would look at it and they would think, that's pretty cool. So they'd have movies like Billy Jack and all these things that would follow the same script of these people that just said, I'm tired of this, and I'm going to get justice, because everyone wants justice. So that's our first person. The second person, an early experience in his life was in Chicago. There was a peace march back in the 1960s. And suddenly, from the middle of all this, there's black demonstrators are walking through the streets of Chicago, and it's in the 60s. And a rock, there's a gentleman that was there, had a child on his shoulders, and a rock comes from this crowd as they're walking through a white neighborhood. And it hits this man right in the temple. He drops like a ton of bricks. The child goes flying another direction. And then there's pandemonium. No one knows what's going on. Everyone's running all over the place. So to this person, he thought and spent most of his life thinking, I saw the very first moments of tension between blacks and whites in our country. And it's our fault, is what he thought. Because that was exactly what it was our fault. So he spent a majority of his life like looking at press recordings and things like this, thinking, why don't they just tell the truth about what really happened? I saw it. So this particular person here, and I'm going to have to go back to my notes. Oh, you know what? Person number one, he wrote a poem. And this was this poor young man. He wrote a poem. He met a girl, fell in love with her. I didn't want to miss this, and that's why I'm glad I had this. And it's actually, it's a very old poem, but he wrote it. And it said, when I love, I feel I'm the king of time. I possess the earth and everything in it, and ride into the sun upon my horse. When I love, I become liquid light, invisible to the eye. And the poems in my notebooks become fields of mimosa and poppy. When I love, the water gushes from my fingers, and grass grows on my tongue. When I love, I become time outside all time. When I love a woman, this is moving to me all of a sudden. When I love a woman, all the trees run barefoot toward me. So, the second person, and this is what reminds me of the first poem. His favorite poem was the Desiderata. Has anyone heard of the Desiderata? I'll read that because that's another great one. Go placidly amid the noise and the haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible, without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly, and listen to others, even the dull and ignorant. They too have their story. Avoid loud and aggressive persons. They are vexatious to the spirit. If you compare yourself with others, you may become vain or bitter, for there will always be greater and lesser persons than yourself. Enjoy your achievements as well as your plans. Keep interested in your own career. However humble, it's a real possession in the changing fortunes of time. Exercise caution in your business affairs, for the world is full of trickery. But let this not blind you to what virtue there is. Many persons strive for high ideals, and everywhere life is full of heroism. Be yourself, especially do not feign affection. Neither be cynical about love, for in the face of all aridity and disenchantment, it is as perennial as the grass. Take kindly the counsel of years, gracefully surrendering the things of youth. Nurture strength of spirit to shield you in sudden misfortune, but do not distress yourself with dark imaginings. Many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. Beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here. And whether or not it's clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore, be at peace with God, whatever you conceive him to be. And whatever your labors and aspirations in the noisy confusion of life, keep peace in your soul. With all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. Be cheerful. Strive to be happy. So now I'll move on to person number 3 real quickly. This person was raised by his mother and 4 younger sisters. He had a real strained relationship with his father because his father worked a lot. And when he wasn't working, he had this conviction that he had to make the world a better place. And he believed that getting involved was a way that he could guarantee that for his son. I'm imagining, because I really don't know, I'm imagining that he also came from a poor background. His father thought he was too nice, and that it's a cruel world, and he thought that his son should toughen up because it's a tough world. But the son believed, because he was around his mother and his sisters, he honored his mother and his sisters, particularly his youngest. He felt that his youngest sister was an old soul. And who doesn't know a 6-year-old that's like a 26 or 46-year-old? like 6 going on 46. And he corresponded back and forth with her. And in his letter to her, he wrote down that the only thing in this world that's a constant is struggle. And hope is a function of struggle. So therefore, whatever struggles he became involved in, they were worthwhile to him. They were meaningful to him. He wrote to her that instead of just looking for miracles or anything else, you should expect miracles, because miracles happen all around us all the time. And his daughter responded to him that his hands, has anyone ever heard of worry stones? They have some cultures, they have worry stones where they can hold it in the palm of their hand, and then they have like a little bit of an indentation. They can do that, and they believe that it helps them. Maybe it takes their mind away from something else or calms them. But she wrote to him, your hands are our worry stones. And we can't wait till you come back. You shouldn't be where you are. Well, the truth of the matter was, he was out with his father, and in one of the towns they lived in, they had power outages for long periods of time. And during one of the power outages, they decided to cut the cables, take a power generator, strip it down, and take that scrap metal into scrap metal dealers so that they could sell it and eat. So that's our third person. These 3 men, their lives are going to intersect. And I have a lot of these movie references. Has anyone seen Sophie's Choice? Well, this is somewhat of a Sophie's Choice kind of a movie, because 2 of these 3 people will not survive this story, and I'll get back to them in just a little bit. For me, I grew up one person out of 4 million people in the city of Chicago. And not a whole lot of things about me were completely outstanding. I wasn't destined to be a star or anything. In fact, I ran, even the notable things I did were actually pretty average. I ran the Boston Marathon, and when I finished, it was the 100th Boston Marathon, and it was my life's goal to run in that race. And when I got done, I was talking with some people afterwards, and they didn't ask, people don't always ask, did you finish? They say, what place did you finish? And I was all proud of myself, and I said, well, I finished 5,418th place, which really didn't impress anybody. I think it's pretty notable, but you finished in 5,418th place? Yes, not 5,420th, but 5,418th. That was me. So I was real proud of that. It didn't bother me to be average when I was young, because I looked at my parents. My parents had a great deal of an effect on me. My father is probably similar to the story that I had. He's a middle-class guy. He worked very hard. He worked 2 jobs. And I used to think, it's the average people in Chicago. I would look at the Hancock Center. I'm thinking, Hancock Center was built by just average Joes, by tradesmen. So I'm thinking they weren't superstars. They just were people that go to work every day. There was something that was meaningful to me about that. So I think that's one of the things my father taught me, is that it's everything that happens along the way is important. And when you add all those things together, you have magnificent things like the buildings they make. And Chicago has a lot of these buildings that were made in the 1800s that are just beautiful. Brownstone and white stone buildings. Before I deployed, I was lucky enough to have a stopover. I was getting ready to leave for Iraq, and this was not long after Saddam Hussein was hung, and the company was swirling into just violence. So my parents dropped me off at the airport, and when I got to the airport, it was almost like no one even wanted to say anything. My mother had said the previous night, she looked at me and said, "Why